I'm going to talk to you guys today about, if you've been journeying with us, we've been talking a lot about discipleship for some time now, kind of a long series of, our aim is to create a disciple-making culture, right? Because we see it in the Bible that making disciples is clearly the job of those who follow Jesus, right? He made disciples. It was clear that he commanded his disciples to make disciples, and those disciples we see go on making more and more disciples. So what we want to do is make sure that we do what we can to infuse our culture with disciple making. We want to give perspective. We want to give tools. We want to give all kinds of practical things to equip all of us to make disciples to the degree that God has called each of us to do that. So today I'm going to be talking about a lifestyle of discipleship lifestyle. So this will be kind of a big picture teaching, and I say that because you could apply a lot of the things I'm going to talk about to any of our primary practices, but I'm going to be focusing on the primary practice of discipleship. So God may speak to you through this about another practice, but we're going big on discipleship today. Last week, Wade showed us a graphic. I think it's helpful for what I'm talking about today. So if you can show this arrow. So, this is the life of a disciple with some motion to it. Like the harvest, those are people who are far from God. We'd consider anyone who's unchurched, who doesn't know the Lord, in the harvest kind of category. That's the word that Jesus uses. And then there's this transition from somebody who's like seeking God, pursuing a relationship with him, to they're a disciple. They're following Jesus. They're putting his words into practice. And then there's a transition phase to being a disciple maker, which means you're not just following Jesus yourself. You're intentionally participating in the formative process of somebody else who is trying to have a relationship with God to make disciples. So what I'm talking about today highlights this next part. Yes. This transition phase, like, what does it even look like to go from I'm just a disciple to now I just make this big jump to being disciple maker all of a sudden? Like, what are some of these kind of in-between things that don't stop when you become a disciple maker, but if you're wanting to begin a lifestyle of making disciples, what are some of the things that you can get at to move in that direction? Does that make sense? Yep, cool. Because if you want to make disciples, you want a lifestyle of disciple making, which I mean to say, you want a lifestyle where making disciples isn't out of character for you, right? Where that just fits with how you do life, with how you're going about life and relationships. And to illustrate some of this, I remember it was a couple years ago. I was asked by somebody, he was in a writing program, and he was doing this podcast. It was a financial podcast, and for some reason he wanted to interview me about some stuff, about taking financial risks. And a lot of it had to do with how my undergrad was in chemistry, and then my graduate degree was in counseling, and then I ended up being a pastor's assistant here, and how that's just stepping down the income ladder with every step. The more educated I got, the less and less I was making. So he obviously had some questions for me about that and how that was working out. But it was really great. I had a good time on this podcast, and he asked me a question about what I would say to somebody who wants to take financial risks, like for the Lord. And I said something that I think it was impactful for him, and I continue to go back to. And I said something along the lines of, if you just think you're going to wake up one day and take a big financial risk, and you haven't been taking small risks along the way, like, you're kidding yourself, right? You're kidding yourself if you think like, oh, I'm going to be this like big financial risk taker one day, but I've never taken even a small one in my life. Like, it might happen, but I'm not going to bet on that situation happening if your lifestyle isn't supporting those kinds of choices. So goals and dreams that aren't consistent with your lifestyle likely aren't going to happen, right? So how do we have a lifestyle where it's like, oh, this person, if I'm going to make a disciple someday, if I'm going to lead a microchurch someday, like, it fits. I've been making the small choices that agree with that. So I want to pray, and we'll jump in a little bit and listen to a little audio clip and look at the words. But yeah, Lord, I pray that you would help us learn how to make disciples, that would be so consistent with our lifestyle, that you would help us to move in that direction. I pray that you would teach us through your word. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, you can take this down. You can go back to the main slide. I want to share with you an audio clip that was shared with me by Ava. She had sent it a little bit ago. It was a link to a website with a ton of Dallas Willard teachings, and I listened to maybe 1.5 of them. They're really good, but I didn't listen to the whole. There was a whole bunch. There's like 5 or 6 teachings on it, which are they're just really great. If you've heard him teach, he does a really great job. But I want to play. He's boring to listen to, but it's gold. He's a philosopher. Yeah. So it's really good stuff. But I just want to play. Wade played a clip from something last week, and I was like, man, that was cool. I could do that. It was a reproducible strategy, and I think this is how he did it. I'll figure out. Oh, turn the volume up on my phone.
And we see that discipleship to Jesus is the greatest opportunity that human beings ever have. Now, here's a key transition. When we hear these things, or when we hear the commands of Jesus, you remember Jesus said that we should hear his word and do it. That calling him Lord and not doing what he said somehow missed the point. But the one thing we have to understand now is that our aim must not be just to do the things that Jesus said. Hang on with me now, because this is a crucial move. If we try to just do what Jesus said, we will become death-dealing legalists. And I'm sure you know enough of the history of the world to know that this has happened over and over and over again. They never take the whole story, but they'll take some particular part of it, and then they'll make a denomination out of that or something. Right? And that'll be their peculiarity, and they'll be very legalistic about that. They may be as mean as they could be, but they'll hang on to that little set of things. Right? And that's where we get so many mean Christians, is they become legalistic about certain kinds of practices, and if you don't agree with them, they'll kill you over it. All in a good cause. So now here's what we have to say at this point. That the object is not to do the things that Jesus said, but to become the kind of person who would do those things. It's not to do the things that Jesus said, but to become the kind of person who would do those things.
Thanks, Dallas. Man. Yeah, so that's a profound truth there, and he goes on to explain some different ways that works out of what the goal is. But I just love that. What if we could approach discipleship with, this is something that you're supposed to do, and if you're not doing it, there's a problem. So we're going to try to make sure that you need to do it, whatever's going on, and make a legalism out of it. But what if it's more about becoming the types of people who just naturally and easily make disciples? That's just who we are. That's just what we do. And whether we have a context where that happens or not, whether we're leading a microchurch or whether we're just in a room full of people like this, we're finding ways to invest in other people to participate in their formative process. And I just think about, when I hear that, about the disciples in the book of Acts, it doesn't seem like they're going around with Jesus' commands on the forefront of their mind, that's driving what they're doing. It seems like they're just naturally doing they're the kinds of people who just continue Jesus' ministry. They run into the lame man at the gate, and they're probably not thinking, well, Jesus told us to do this, so we better pray for this guy. It seems like they're the type of people who stop and pray for the man who's begging, take up your mat and walk. So there's a number of questions that raises for me, because one thing we do in microchurches a lot is ask for commitments. We ask for people to apply what they've learned. So it's how does that square, committing to do something? How does obeying God's word square with shaping this lifestyle where we're just naturally able to do the things? We're the type of people who do the things Jesus talked about. And I have two thoughts to that. I think one, there's something to be said for having a lifestyle of when we come to the Word, we do something about it. Like that's a lifestyle in and of itself. Like we learn something, God teaches us through His Word, and we turn and apply that. We turn that into action. And to some degree, it doesn't matter what your commitment is, as long as it's related to the passage. But there's something to be said for applying it at all. Every time, making a routine habit of. I'm the kind of person where when God teaches me something, I find a way to act on it. I find a way to trust it, to believe it, to apply it, to put it into practice, to share it. And I think the second point is what a lot of the rest of what I'm talking about today hinges on, is that applying it and using your will, using obedience, using discipline, self-discipline, is a way to shape your own lifestyles. Right? So when I say lifestyle in this talk, what I'm talking about is the things that a person or group of people usually do. I just looked it up online. Super simple. Like, it's the things that you usually do. And we as people, you've probably found this, are largely unable just to shape our lifestyles just by will. Like, we're in March 2nd, and people made all kinds of New Year's resolutions about the lifestyle changes they wanted to have. But it didn't start on January 1st. That's not a lifestyle at that point. If you're still doing it, you're on your way to creating a lifestyle of that. I could be like, I want a lifestyle of good diet and exercise. And if I just say that, that doesn't mean that that's my life, right? It takes discipline. It takes a lot of self-control. It takes patience. So discipline's our best shot at creating a lifestyle, because discipline creates habits, which shapes the way we do our life and the way that we usually do things, right? Because there's no lifestyle that's good for us and that's healthy that isn't hard to maintain, that isn't hard to start, that doesn't take discipline. And I think something I've experienced in our culture, or at least in some of the younger generations, like my generation and younger, is like this radical authenticity that's really, really great on one hand, but on the other hand, it's like you have this whole, well, what if my heart's not in it? Should I keep doing it? Like, even if that's not the case, like, oh, I really want to be authentic when I worship, but what if I'm not feeling it? Like, that doesn't seem authentic to sing, even when that's not kind of an expression of what's going on inside. But I would say, if you take any discipline, if you take running as an example, like, you're not always going to feel like doing it. Sometimes it's going to be raining or snowing or really cold. If you think about leading worship, like if you're on the worship team and you're coming in like, I don't really feel like worshiping today. I'm actually in a really bad mood and I'm kind of cranky. So that would be like, why would I do that? Why would I put myself in that position? But if you think about what those things say about you, if you can actually apply discipline to the things you want to do, at the end of the day you can say, hey, you know what? I went for a run even though it was raining outside. That makes me a true runner because I run even when it's hard. Hey, I worship today even though I'm in a terrible, terrible mood. Like, I think that makes me a true worshiper. Like, it doesn't matter what's going on in here. Like, I'm committed to do it anyway. My lifestyle says something about me despite the circumstances. So discipline is the key to creating an enduring lifestyle. So the passage we'll look at today is in 1 Corinthians 9, 24 to 27. So if you want to turn there, I'll read it here in a second. So this is from Paul writing to the Corinthians. At this point, he's talking a lot about the gospel. And he says, do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? Run in such a way as to get the prize. Everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. They do it to get a crown that will not last, but we do it to get a crown that will last forever. Therefore, I do not run like someone running aimlessly. I do not fight like a boxer beating the air. No, I strike a blow to my body and make it my slave, so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified for the prize. That's 1 Corinthians 9, 24 to 27. So a couple quick observations that just jump off the page at me is like, Paul had some goals in preaching the gospel, right? There's a prize that he's after, right? His reward in sharing the gospel. So whatever that is, like he's after something. He's setting some goals that discipline is going to help him move towards, right? And the other thing I see is like not all training or activity is beneficial. Like, it might look right, but that doesn't mean that it's working to craft that kind of lifestyle to help you move towards your goal, right? It's like someone running aimlessly. So, in typical kind of church culture life, there's all kinds of things that you can fill your schedule with, but they're not all there to help you grow in your goal of being a disciple maker. They might all be good, but like a runner running aimlessly, it's like, oh wow, that person's really running hard, right? But they're not really getting any closer to their goal, if that makes sense. So running hard, you can run hard and you can run aimlessly at the same time. So I really like the athlete metaphor. I picked it because Susan really resonates with sports analogies. Oh man, that's the running joke. Every time I use a sports analogy, Susan's like, that really just hits so close to home. Yep. But yeah, I really like the athletic analogy. So I did a lot of sports growing up, and something you may not know about me is I was awarded academic All-OAC for the Ohio Athletic Conference at Muskingum for soccer. And something that a lot more people don't know about me is I never played a game of varsity soccer at Muskingum in my life, which is really funny. They were doing the lineup. I played second team for 2 years, and they were going through the starters when they were announcing them. They got to Eric Riley. Some of you guys know Eric. And they're like, number 19, Cameron Godfrey, and like kept going. And everyone's like, oh, that was weird. But then that roster got submitted with all the other ones. And at the end of the year, I got this academic award letter because of my grades for academic All-OAC. So I think I know what I'm talking about when I talk about sports. That's my resume. But I've been around a lot of athletes that were really great at their sport, and I've learned a lot of things, and Paul's words here really hold true. So I want to talk a little bit about what discipline means to an athlete. There's at least two things that it means to an athlete that we see here in Paul's analogy. When you're an athlete, one thing that discipline means is that you say no to things that are otherwise fine because you're after a goal. Right? I was reading a commentary on this passage. It says an athlete must refuse things that may be fine in themselves but will hinder the pursuit of their goal. Right? So if you have a game coming up, it's not a moral issue. It's not an issue of right or wrong to stay up late. But to stay up late the night before your big game is not going to help you to perform in your goal. If you wake up and eat a ton of donuts and French toast for breakfast, that's not a matter of right or wrong. But that's not how you want to prepare for your game, right? For cross country, right? You're not going to load up on sugar, all kinds of stuff. It's a bad idea. So for an athlete, discipline means saying no to things that everyone around you might be saying yes to with no consequence. Like it's not a matter of right or wrong, but you're after something different. So discipline helps you say no to things because you're saying yes to something greater. Another thing is it means to practice, to prepare in small moments to get ready for the big moments, right? To become the type of person who can naturally perform when it counts. So as an athlete, that means when you step up for a penalty kick in soccer, it's not your first penalty kick you've ever taken. You've done tons of them in practice. If you want to dunk in a basketball game, you've been practicing. You are the type of person who can do that, even under pressure. So those are a couple things that discipline means to an athlete. You prioritize and you practice. And there's another quote that I heard. I was listening to the We Are Vineyard podcast, and it's a really great podcast if anybody wants to kind of get your finger on the pulse of the vineyard movement, hear some stories from the leaders. It's basically just a ton of stories, like different leaders, and then they share a little bit at the end. But Jay Pathak was sharing a quote, I think it was from a book, and he may have changed it a little bit for the use of the podcast. But he said, in life, often you don't rise to the level of your goals. Like we think that, like we'll set these lofty goals and we'll rise to that kind of challenge. We'll rise to our goals. He said that often doesn't happen. What typically happens is that we fall to the level of our disciplines. So you don't rise to the level of your goals. You fall back to the level of your disciplines. So I found that to be enormously true. And the question that comes along with that for me is, like, are your disciplines, the ones that you have right now, are they carrying you where you want to go, or are they going somewhere else? I think that's a question for all of us. Like, what disciplines do we have, and are they actually helping? Are they moving us towards a goal? If it's having a disciple-making lifestyle, do we have disciple-making disciplines that are helping us move towards that. So I want to talk about just a couple disciplines that lead to a disciple-making lifestyle. So back to that picture, the arrow. Like, what kind of disciplines get you in this section of the arrow moving forward? So, these are the things that the kind of person who makes disciples just naturally do. They just do as a matter of being disciple makers. And they're actually things that you can do to start to shape your lifestyle, where that's not out of character, for you to lead a microchurch, for you to have like a personal one-on-one discipleship relationship with somebody. And these are things that May and I have we did for years. Did these things, these disciplines, and we didn't have a microchurch, and then God kind of formed a microchurch around us, and we continue to do these things. But that kind of in-between time, it's not like we were just sitting around waiting. We were forming these disciplines and really committing to them to produce this lifestyle, so that when we did have somebody to walk alongside in a personal discipleship relationship, we were ready. So when we did have a microchurch, we were able to prepare because we had some foundation that we were going off of, and it wasn't out of character for us to enter into those settings. So the first one, so these are important, but they're not exhaustive. The first one is prioritize. So the first two really rely on what we've learned about athletes. Prioritize. You'll need to say no to things that are fine in themselves, but don't help you with your goal, right? A lifestyle of disciple making means making time for people. This is what it'll probably mean for almost all of us to prioritize disciple making, is to make time and space in our lives for other people. If you don't have time for yourself or for your family, you're not going to have time to give to other people, plain and simple. So microchurch leaders, we have 6 microchurches. All of those leaders are currently making time for people in their lives, right? Everybody who's involved in a personal discipleship relationship is making time for someone else in that way. And if you want to make investments in somebody else's life, whether it's a formal relationship like microchurch leader or kind of a committed personal discipleship, if you're just wanting to make any kind of investment, you need to have time and space for people in your life, right? It's an issue of margin. Are you able to prioritize margin and make space even if nobody's there to fill it, right? Are you able to create space if somebody was to be in your life for you to invest in, that time and that space is even there to give away to begin with, right? And it's great. Even if nobody takes it, that margin really blesses you and is really awesome. And then when somebody does come along, you're ready to joyfully give it because you've been holding on to some of that space and margin in your life. So, is that something that's important to you, having space for other people in your life? Does your life have space for other people? Or have you said yes to too many other things that hinder your pursuit of that goal, right? I know that our lives are just full of, if we go to every premiere of every movie that we want to see, if we go to all the farmers markets, if we go to all the events that the city puts on, if we take part in every organization that we really believe in, it's like we just fill our lives up with so many kinds of things that distract us from our goal. Number 2, practice. Like practice to an athlete. Do you make small investments in people's lives? Do you share insights, things that God's shared with you? Do you disciple others in small ways so that when the big ways come, you're kind of ready for it? And the thought that I had with this is like, when you're receiving content, when you're at an all-church gathering, listening to a teaching, when you're listening to a podcast or a teaching somewhere, like a disciple maker will listen with ears that are ready to pass along good information to people. Somebody who isn't a disciple maker, and this is me for years and even still today, at times I'm training myself to be a little different, but you just listen to content like you're the last stop, right? It's like, did this benefit me? Did this not? Was this good? Did this help me? And then yes, no, or maybe, and then that's the end of it, right? A disciple maker will listen to something and be like, sometimes I'll hear a teaching, I'm like, yeah, I've already heard all of this, like none of it was new, it didn't excite anything in me. But a disciple maker is like, well, nothing was new in there, but the way that they said this was really helpful I bet this person would really benefit from the way that was phrased or the way that this was put together. Like, I don't think they quite have this perspective. I want to share this with someone. Someone with a disciple maker perspective will listen to a teaching and is like, man, that was really impactful to me. I bet it would be really impactful to these people that I know, this person in my microchurch, this person that I'm really close with, and they're ready to pass along information. So does that make sense? It's like, oh, it doesn't just end at me, like it can flow through me and I can partner with different resources to other people. Same thing if you're spending time in the Word and God teaches you something. Is it like, wow, that was really impactful for me, and then I just kind of move on? Or is it like, who else needs to know? This is why in microchurches a lot of times on our guide we have, who are you going to share this passage with? Which is not just an evangelism question of who are you going to share this good news with. It's a discipleship question. Who can you take this truth that you've learned and pass it on to? Practice. Number 3 is pursue people. You guys noticing a trend? I never do like all, John likes it, starting all at the same letter. We'll see what the 4th one is. I can't wait. Pursue people. Are you moving towards people? This is one of the biggest disciple-making things, right? Do you move towards people who are far from God? Discipleship, if you don't know, starts before anybody makes a decision to follow Jesus. Discipleship is intentionally participating in the formative process of a disciple, which starts when they first start learning about who God is, when God starts revealing himself to them, when you start helping them envision what life with God could look like. That's discipleship. So you can disciple someone to a decision to follow Jesus and then through and on for the rest of their life. So are you discipling people who are far from God? Are you pursuing people who don't have a relationship with Jesus? Because people who you see naturally make disciples are people who are committed to the discipline of sharing the hope of Jesus with other people. Right? People who naturally make disciples have a discipline of sharing their faith with other people. It's huge. Where do you think, like Wade talked about last time, like where do you think new disciples come from? Like if you don't have anyone in your life to disciple, maybe they're not walking with God yet. Maybe they haven't even discovered who he is. So discipleship starts there. And then number 4 is pray. Yes. 4 P's. I never do anything like this. I was like thinking through, I'm like, they're all going to start with P. Wow, that's like amazing. None of them's a stretch. It was cool. Pray. Like Wade talked about, do you pursue people? I changed it. It was something else, but I was like, oh, it works. Pray. So like Wade was talking about a couple weeks ago, do you pray for people in your life who need discipled? Do you pray for disciple makers that you know about? Do you pray for microchurch leaders? Basically, do you pray for anybody other than yourself or your family? Because those kinds of prayers will move you towards making disciples almost every time if you do that consistently. Cool. So prioritize, practice, pursue people, and pray. If you do those things, those will shape your life and form you into a disciple maker. And then you're just waiting for a context. You're just waiting for the right people. You're waiting for a group of people. You're partnering with what God's doing if you can do those things. And get you in a place where he can steer you. So, if you want to have a lifestyle of disciple making, where you don't just have to always think about, I'm supposed to be making disciples, this is what the Bible says, like there's this weird pressure from whoever or wherever. If you just want to do that because you're the type of person who just does those things, you need disciplines to get that started. And your disciplines will even carry you through your lifestyle. Like, I don't think those ever end. But at some point, if you do disciplines enough, it creates this own momentum in your life where it just gets easier to do because it's just what you usually do. Like, this is life now. We make space for people. It's not hard. It's hard, but it's not as hard as it used to be. And it's not as hard as it is for other people because we've done it for so long. And we just pray for people. You know, when our family prays, when I pray, like, our minds just instantly go towards people who need Jesus, who need discipled. So this list is a good way to start incorporating disciplines to the point where disciple making isn't out of character for you. You're not just joking yourself, hoping you'll wake up one day with a micro church that just appeared out of nowhere, which may happen. I'm not going to say it won't, but are you ready at that point? Maybe everybody's ready but you, and you've never entertained those thoughts or positioned yourself for that. But yeah, so Lord, I just pray you would help us to have lifestyles of doing the kinds of things Jesus said, where it wouldn't be out of character for us, where we wouldn't have to force it or be death-dealing legalists like Dallas Willard said, that would just naturally overflow from our lives. Would you help us to establish just rhythms and disciplines to create habits in our lives that help us be the kinds of people that we want to be the kinds of people that are like Jesus? Would you help us to encourage one another? God, I pray that you would just create a vision in each of our lives for what disciple making could look like in a way that's consistent with who we are. Help us catch a vision for what it would look like for us to make disciples, for each of us. How you've gifted us uniquely, how you've called us, what that would mean, and what needs to change, what things we need to put in our lives to help us move towards that. So I just thank you for just all the people in this room, all the people. It's wild. God, so many people here are making disciples, and it's awesome. So hopefully this is a teaching they get to pass along to people. Of like, here's how you do some of the things that I've been doing. Like, you commit to these things. You have some discipline, form a lifestyle. So God, I just thank you for the ways you're moving this morning. Would you just take this truth just deeper into our lives so we can look more like you? Amen.